Hello and welcome. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast. This episode features Christine Ma-Kellams, the author of The Band, listed in the music category on Art in Fiction. Christine Ma-Kellams is an LA-based cultural psychologist, first-generation American, and college professor at San Jose State University. The Band is her debut novel. Welcome to the Art and Fiction podcast, Christine.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So, The Band is the first novel I've ever read that centers around a K-pop boy band, which is why I chose it. It's something I know very little about. I have watched a few BTS videos. I think it's almost
Yay.
impossible not to be impressed and entertained
Yes.
by them, but it's
hmm
not a world I know at all. So, could you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for the novel? Why K-pop?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a long-standing just a fan of pop music in general. Like growing up as a kid, when I was in high school and middle school, I was obsessed with NSYNC and 98 Degrees and all those bands. And in college, my room and I would fight over whether we thought Backstreet Boys or NSYNC and Justin Timberlake were superior. But I think when K-pop came around in the last decade or so, I was really resistant to it at first because I thought I had seen it all before, right? Like having
Yeah.
followed boy bands in America in the early aughts. But then, thanks to BTS and thanks to the way I think they really infiltrated mainstream American media through the James Corden show and SNL and all these late night shows, I really started to realize that the music coming out of South Korea was an entirely different animal than anything I had ever seen. Even when I do historical dives into the Beatles, for example, and Beatlemania, which, admittedly is a little before my time, even when I look into those phenomenon, I still feel what is happening with the fandom and the music coming out of Seoul still feels like a fundamentally different version of the way we consume music. So I thought it was super fascinating and I wanted to write a fictionalized book about it.
Yes, and I'm so glad you did because when I saw it on the shelves in my library, I went, "Oh, a book about K-pop. How cool
Yeah.
is that?" And then when I
Mhm.
got into it, I went, "Wow, this is so much more. There's a lot going on here." So it's your
Yeah.
debut novel. So
Mhm.
what motivated you to write it aside from a love of K-pop?
Well, I think first and foremost, I am a fan of BTS in particular. I started writing during the pandemic in 2020 and listening and consuming their content online. I was immediately obsessed, but I was also pretty convinced that there's probably way more happening behind the scenes, especially in the world of K-pop. And I was really curious about it. And because I think, more than American musicians, I think the realm of K-pop is very tightly guarded. I think
Yes.
culturally, they're much more private and there's many more things that we probably don't know about. Whereas I think a lot of American musicians, we sort of know all the details of their personal lives. So it makes the tabloids, we're just aware of it much more. They're much more transparent in the way they sort of sometimes air out even dirty laundry. And with K-pop, it seems much more controlled. We don't see a lot of dirty laundry. And when we do, it's only when something really catastrophic happens. And so it just, the whole the combination just made me really deeply curious. And since I was like, there's no way I can know for sure what happens behind the scenes, I thought creating a fictionalized version that specifically focuses on some of the, I think, challenges, like psychologically, especially of being someone with that level of renown and that level of international pressure, as well as domestic pressure from your own government to, represent your country to the world, I think is just a really interesting way to situate a story.
Yes, I mean, there's so much scope for imagination in this. As you said, because we know nothing about behind the scenes, it does
Yeah.
seem very manufactured, the little I know about it. I mean, not
Mhm.
in a bad way. It's just that it seems very controlled, I guess is a better word. So as a
Mhm.
novelist looking for something to write about, going behind the scenes of something we know very little about is very exciting. You must have found that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it leaves a lot of room to just play around with, putting yourselves in their shoes, right? Like empathically trying to time travel and space travel to see what you think, what you can imagine would be like, and the traumas and the highs and the
Yeah.
lows, that kind of life.
So the novel's been described as a scathing indictment of fandom and the way the industry often turns a blind eye to the mental health of its stars. So how do you think you achieve showing this in the novel?
Yeah, so I think that was really a point of tension for me because on the one hand, I myself am a fan, right? I
Yeah.
love BTS in particular as much as anyone I think else in the fandom. And so I do think the fandom is also what makes a lot of K-pop special. The way that the fandom really commits to not only the musicians themselves, but their messaging and their causes and their platforms, I think is really unique to K-pop. The way the fans go
Yeah.
in and the fact that and the way that like this kind of all in fandom sort of goes beyond music and like bleeds into social issues, political causes, all this good
Yes.
stuff. So on the one hand, I think fandom is great and is the part of the reason K-pop is so successful and so unique. On the other hand, I think, with all big things, there's always a dark side. So in this particular book, one of the storylines that sort of drives the plot of the book is a particularly, problematic fan, right? Who is not only obsessive, but obsessive to the point where they take it very personally when these idols can't sort of give her the level of attention that she somehow feels like she deserves,
Yeah.
and violently turns against them, right? So I thought it was an interesting storyline because the parasocial aspect of many of our modern day relationships as a psychologist and a social psychologist is always something that fascinates me. And I think that is definitely the way of the future, where more and more now, even if you know nothing about K-pop, I suspect a large percentage of the population probably has in one way or another a parasocial relationship in their life, right? Like where somebody you follow, someone you've seen on TV or some other screen, someone you don't know, it could even be an author for all we know, right? Some person that you don't personally know, but
Yeah.
somehow you feel like you know them a little bit, or you can
Yeah.
tell what they're thinking, or you like them a little too much, right? One way or another, I feel like parasocial relationships are here to stay, and especially with social media and the way we're always
Mhm.
online now. I think these are only going to get more intense over time, not less. So I thought it would be really curious to capitalize and do a deep dive on what happens when one of these parasocial relationships goes off the rails.
That's fantastic. And it's true because we are a little too involved with people that we see on the internet and we feel like they owe us something even. And of course, and then you get these problems like the rabid fans and the people that go off the rails. We do feel that people who are in the public eye somehow owe us more than just entertainment or whatever it is they do, which is scary, isn't it?
It is, and it also, I feel like makes sense, right? So one of the things I talk a lot to whenever I'm talking with students about psychology, right? I always tell them, it's easy to judge ourselves and other people for sort of some of the seemingly crazy things we do, right? But if you think about it, our brains were not evolved for this very modern, strange world that we inhabit, right? Our brains were evolved to assume that if I see a face, that's probably going to be a face that I know, that I'll have to interact with, then I'm going to have to predict how they'll respond to the way I think and the things I do. Our brains are not programmed to see faces thousands or millions of miles away that we will never have to interact with in person, right? So I
Right?
think part of the reason it's so hard to adapt is because we have millions of years of evolution bring us to this point, and then it seems like overnight or over a couple of years, our social lives have been drastically rewired thanks to our
Yeah.
phones and devices. And I don't think biologically we've caught up to realize where we are.
I don't think we know the ramifications. It worries me for children, you know,
Mhm.
what that must be like growing up with that. At least I didn't grow up with that. I didn't
Yeah.
come to this until, last 30 years. But even so, yeah, you spend more time with fake people on screens than you
Mhm.
do with real people. Anyway,
Yes.
but it's what we have and we have to cope with it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the novel's narrator. I actually listened to the audio book, so I kind of felt like I really got to know her. But she's
Yeah.
a sort of nameless psychologist who takes Dury, the K-pop star, into her home in LA. So she
Mhm.
comments frequently about psychology, which I thoroughly enjoyed all of the insertions that you did about psychology and
Oh,
social
thank
culture
you.
and all that kind of thing. So how
Mhm.
did your own experience as a psychologist yourself help you write these scenes?
Yeah, so I leaned in a lot to many of the psychological studies that I, teach about and I do research on. And though I think the one that the sort of the field of psychology I'm in myself that I do all my research and a lot of my teaching in is in cross-cultural psychology, right? So
Oh,
comparing the sort of the like the emotional lives of, European Americans versus like Asians and Asian Americans. And so
Mm,
that was definitely sort of a common question that I've returned to over and over again. And I think the underlying theme of mental health issues throughout the band, and specifically like, depression and anxiety, all this other stuff that I think now more than ever we're aware of as a society. Um, was really interesting to me from the cross-cultural standpoint, because I think one of the things we know based on, years of cross-cultural research is that mental illness and mental health doesn't look the same way, like depending on where you're from, right? So it might look
mm,
one way in America, and it might look a very different way in a place like South Korea or in East Asia in general. And I think that's part of the challenge, right? Like figuring out what the signs and symptoms are. And I think that's what was most interesting to situate a mental health crisis, like in a cross-cultural context, right? Like what happens if you're having a mental health crisis in a totally new country, in a brand new city where people are not expecting your symptoms, right? Like where people think depression looks one way, and then you're not the prototype for what depression is supposed to look like, right? So I thought that was super interesting. And so all the studies the novel is obviously fictional, but all the studies I cite are real, because I
yeah.
do want to sort of ask the question of, do you know when someone's having a meltdown? Can you tell? And does your own sort of cultural background influence how you interpret what's happening?
Yes, and that was done very well. I really enjoyed that. I also wanted to talk about the role that cancel culture plays in the novel because Dury is sort of canceled towards the beginning.
Yeah.
So why cancel culture? Why did you kind of center it around that?
Yeah, I centered around cancel culture because I also thought it was one of those like very newish phenomenon
Hmm.
that seemed to come in and sort of change people's lives. And I remember when cancel culture first came on the scene many years ago, it seemed like a life sentence, right? Where like famous people I saw being canceled seemed to disappear for years at a time. And I
Yeah,
think the assumption was that once you were canceled, you were gone forever, right? And I think, interestingly, over the course after writing the novel and the novel coming out, I've noticed in more recent years that many of these relatively famous, politicians or actors or,
yeah,
other famous people who are canceled are also slowly making a comeback. That cancellation doesn't seem permanent anymore. There's still ramifications, but people are also recovering from cancellation. So
interesting.
I thought that was super interesting. Like these kind of sociological trends that sort of take a society by storm and then sort of get like change over time, I always think are super neat to think about. Um, and even as someone who's not in the public eye, personally, I do think that I think it's it's much more interesting when you think about the fact that if all of us lived in a way where the stuff we said and the stuff we did got magnified, where the whole universe knew about it, I wonder how many of us could survive cancel culture if we were actually the target of any of it, you know? Because
Probably not.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
right? So even when people do horrible things, sometimes even if I disagree with what they're doing, sometimes I do wonder. I think that's really bad, but chances are I've done bad things too, where if the whole world knew about it, I'd be horrified and embarrassed, and I'd run away and hide too. So yeah, it's sort of one of the things that I think about just in the back of my head, and I wonder what would happen if more people, put themselves in the shoes of someone that's been canceled.
perhaps we need to have a little bit more grace. Give people
Yeah.
more grace. You know, the
Hmm.
kind of grace we give ourselves and our loved ones. But for some reason, we think people in the public eye have to be completely pure, that they can
Hmm.
never have done a bad thing or had a bad thought, which is, yeah, I mean, they're human. It's,
Yeah, exactly. I think we're much slower to forgive people who are well
people we
known.
don't know. It's yeah,
Yeah.
it is, and that is, of course, is exacerbated, as you said, by social media and the fact that we think we know these people and that they're our friends. They're not our friends.
Yeah, exactly.
I read that you you sort of described the band. I just love this as fan fiction meets literary fiction, which I think is
Hmm.
quite accurate. So explain a little bit more what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I mean, I've never really dabbled too heavily in the fan fiction space, but I know that
Yeah.
exists, right? There's like
Oh, it's
platform,
huge.
yeah,
Yeah.
and online sites dedicated to people, not just in K-pop, but Star Wars fan
My
fiction.
my daughter has been writing fan fiction since she was 12, so
No way.
and
Wow.
still does. Yes, in all
Yeah.
sorts of areas.
I think it's super fascinating that people sort of appropriate these worlds that they love and they
Yeah.
create worlds out of them. And when I think about my own writing, even though it's technically literary fiction, I feel like I don't know, and I'm not sure what it's like for other authors, but for me at least, I only write about people or phenomenon that I'm a little bit in love with or obsessed with. Like I would never write a book about people I hate or things that I think are terrible. Right. So I almost feel like almost all writing, fictional writing, is probably some version of fan fiction or another. You're writing about things like about eras you love or like historical figures you love. And if you, since you write historical fiction, I'm really curious what you do. Like when you pick your historical figures or your historical eras, are you picking things where you love that era or you love that, persona in history and you're basing it on a person you admire? For me, it seems like a natural extension of life to write quote unquote fan fiction, no matter what genre your book technically falls into. I don't know. How do you
That's
feel?
actually very true. I suppose all writing is fan fiction in a way, because yeah, I mean, we don't write about things we don't like. When I
Yeah.
choose an era, it's because I'm fascinated by it. There's something about it, about the characters or whatever, that I want to write about. So, because you're going to spend an awful lot of time there when you're
Yeah.
writing a novel, so you have to kind of like it. Yeah, I like that. That's the other thing I love about your novel is how funny it is. I mean, sometimes I was actually listening to it often when I was driving, and I'd be laughing out loud.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
just
sweet compliment.
love the way that the way your character looks at the world, and the sort of wry way she comments on it. So how much is that you? I think we're all our characters,
Oh,
but
yeah, I mean, certainly, I don't, I think the narrator is me sort of in voice, not necessarily in details or
yeah,
facts,
no,
right? So her life is not really mine, but the way she sort of sees the world definitely reflects my own voice. And I think that's sort of the most intuitive. I know about authors. I feel like I hear about authors who write narrators who are totally different from themselves. And I don't know if you've ever done that. Like when you write, have you ever written a narrator where the voice is the opposite of your own? I feel like that would be very hard. I'm sure it's possible.
not yet. Although I've never written a novel in the first person, or at least published a novel in the first person,
Oh,
which I'm
interesting.
just about to start right now. So there you go.
Oh, really? And is
I'm
the
gonna
one
try
that you're
it. Yeah,
starting sort of similar to your own internal voice, do you think?
I'm not sure yet.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
because I've
Yeah.
just started, and that character is completely different from me. I mean, it's someone from the 1880s in France, so
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in. It might not end up in the first person by the time the novel's finished, but I thought, I'm going to give myself some permission to write the first draft in first person and see what happens. I have
Oh,
no
I like,
idea.
yeah,
Yeah,
I like playing with point of view in general. Like as a
yes,
novelist, I think it's super powerful and a really interesting way of shifting the way you tell a story. So yeah, I'm curious where you land too with that.
yeah, me too, because I only just started it a few days ago.
Oh, nice.
Well, it's one of these novels that I've been writing for 6 months and it just wasn't working, so I just had to stop and totally rejig, and now I'm starting almost from scratch, which
Oh,
hurts, but sometimes you have
yeah.
to do it. I know,
That's
and
pretty
it never
bold.
gets any easier. This is my
Yes.
son, and it doesn't get any easier.
Oh my God, you're so prolific. That's
Well,
amazing.
I don't feel prolific, but then we never do we? Because we always compare ourselves to other people who have done
Yeah,
even more. So, yeah.
that's true.
But actually, speaking of structure, I was very intrigued because this is not something I see very often by your frequent use of second person, like actually breaking the fourth
Mhm.
wall, so to speak, and talking directly to us as
Mhm.
readers, and foreshadowing.
Yeah.
You said you do that a fair bit earlier on, especially when you're talking about the girl band.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do that, or what were you thinking? It was just really interesting.
Yeah. I was actually I'm inspired, if you couldn't tell already, I'm inspired a lot by pop culture and TV and movies and music. And so the breaking the second wall and talking directly to the audience, I got that idea from I don't know if you ever watched the show Fleabag. It was
Yes,
like a TV show where the main character I was obsessed about. And she did the thing where I've never seen TV shows do, which is turn her eyes away from whatever she's talking to and like
yeah,
talking directly to the camera and making these very snarky asides.
yeah.
And I always
I've
thought it
seen
was
the
like,
show. Yeah,
yeah, it's super fascinating. So I thought it would be an interesting thing to do in novels. And also, I always thought, like, who are we kidding, right? Like, in a way, we're always talking to the audience or to the reader, even if we're not explicit. So
that's
might as well
true.
make it explicit every now and then to acknowledge that let's not pretend that we are not, that I'm not directly talking to the reader in one way or another, right? So
Yeah,
it's
we're
just
sort of playing
think
with
out
the
loud.
structure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So why not? You know, I thought it gave a freshness to the novel that I hadn't seen before. So I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank
So
you.
I love that the novel was is being called a thriller. Because I
Mhm.
actually really didn't think of it as a thriller. Did you think of it as a thriller as you were writing it, or is that something that was added later?
Yeah, I didn't think of it as a thriller either. I'm not even sure exactly what defines like I know the textbook
Yeah,
definition of thriller, but as I am reading, I don't think that much about genre. So when the book came out and I saw what like the reason I found out was a thriller was on Goodreads, it would be classified as a thriller, and I was oh,
yeah.
okay, I guess it's a thriller.
Well, you'll
Um,
take it. But
So yeah, I thought that was interesting because that's not I don't read a ton, I read way more literary fiction than I read thrillers, although I do enjoy like the occasional thriller every now and then. So that definitely came out of the blue for me, but I mean I enjoy the plot of thrillers, right? And my only beef against literary is that many
oh,
literary fictions have little plot. So
yes,
I'm a big fan of plot, and I wish sometimes that literary fiction would dabble more in plot. Like sentences are great. I love a pretty sentence. I
yep.
love nice vocabulary.
We,
Also, I want something to happen, right?
well, we
So,
still want story, right?
yeah, exactly. We want
You know.
action, we want change, we want a cliffhanger, maybe. Um, so yeah, I was totally happy to see, it classified as a thriller. So.
Yeah, no, I thought that was interesting. And actually, speaking of plotting, did you plot the whole thing out? Did you know that ending when you started? I'm always intrigued if authors do, because I don't.
Yeah, I don't either. I sort of just start writing and hope for the best, and I have
Ah,
no idea where it's gonna go. So yeah, I'm sure there are authors, and I do wonder if it varies by genre. So I don't know if you talk to a lot of other historical fiction writers, if most of them plot or if very few of them do. I'm always curious if there's systematic differences between who plots and who does the whole pantser business, or whether,
I
it's
know.
just individual preference and there's no way to
It's,
tell.
you know, it's because that's question comes up all the time when authors are talking to each other, obviously. I think it's kind of 50-50. I
Oh,
mean, a
really?
lot of people say, yeah, I do know the end, but I don't know how I get there. And
Oh,
I get a little anxious not knowing the end. And sometimes I get stopped and I can't go on because I don't know the end, which is sort of
yeah.
foolish. But, you know, but also sometimes it's just nice to sit down in the morning and not know what's going to happen. I like
Yeah,
that too. So, in
that's
fact, if
true.
everything was, for me personally, if everything was completely plotted out and outlined, I'd be bored. But what's the point of writing it? It's
Yeah,
done.
exactly. Yeah,
So
then all the
some
writing
people are
gets
meticulously, but you're more, you just see what happens. So how long did it take you to write this novel?
it only took me 3 or 4 months to write
Oh,
it, which is
wow. For you.
unusual. Yeah, I mean, I do work pretty fast. Like, I'm not a perfectionist, so I like to just do stuff and think about it later.
Yeah.
But this one was sort of, even for me, unusually fast. But that said, it was also right during the lockdown in 2020
Yeah.
when we're all online and stuck at home. So I think that was a especially good time for writing a novel when you couldn't leave the house.
So tell us, what would you consider as the novel's theme?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I guess I think one theme is definitely like mental health in our
Mhm.
thoroughly modern era where
Yes.
most of our lives are online. And I think another sort of theme is like I don't know if it is a theme, but like situationships that we find ourselves in. So
Yeah.
a few people have asked me about the nature of the relationship between the K-pop idol and the narrator, and asked to define it, and it's impossible to define the nature of their relationship. But I
Mhm.
think that's also a feature of modern life that think is so fascinating, which is like a situationship, right? Like a relationship that is not classifiable by historical standards of, oh, you guys are coworkers, or you guys are lovers, or you guys are whatever.
Yeah.
Like familial ties. And I think those are also super interesting. So the ambiguous kind of relationships modern life sometimes throws ourselves in, I think would probably be the other major theme.
Which I think is promoted through all of this online stuff, which we've
Yeah.
never had before. You think
Yeah.
that we can meet like this, you know, that
Uh-huh.
would never have been possible.
Yeah.
So would you like to do a short reading from your novel?
Yes. All right. Sounds good. So, chapter one, canceled. We're starting at the end. So, their first single, people laughed, perhaps snorted, would be more accurate. A quintet of boys too young to understand protest, yet rapping like they knew the secret. Everything you build will one day be destroyed, so please make it beautiful. Between the eyeliner and their wraparound shades, no one recognized them as the dickheads and nerds from around the way who were neither cute enough for the soul girls who demanded shoulders and double lids, Eurocentrism at its best, nor brilliant enough for even the country teachers at Gwangju to take note. And it's true, the youngest one had just walked his eighth grade graduation and looked it, but no matter. The rhymes paraded out of his still small mouth so fast I couldn't tell if he was speaking English or Korean, two languages that had never been confused for each other until the band made Konglish their mother tongue. Sure, with the exception of their lead, their English was not terrific, not even now when the world is an older and no wiser of a place, and every other collaboration of theirs is a pop anthem with some American icon who only does stadium tours. But that was the great forgiveness that music afforded. Songs demanded their own cadences. In pledging allegiance to its rhythms, other identifiers like age and accent and gender fell away like old skins on a serpent. If I closed my eyes now and listened to the latest falsetto bridges, the youngest one released on SoundCloud, I might mistake him for a lady angel. It was also no accident that the oldest was also the visual. To call Sangduri the hot one would be a failure of translation, the equivalent of equating Schadenfreude with simpler joys. Because for a boy group with a long lineage of feral female fans, sex was not exactly what they were selling. Like the Fab Four of yore, a gifted tongue could render a man's looks an afterthought. No matter that the lead recently admitted that those wraparound shades from their debut album were less about appropriating black fashion and more about hiding his own exceedingly Korean face, which he did not consider his forte. Now they were all beautiful for no other reason than the worship that they inspired. How 22 million Twitter followers plus threefold that number of additional fans who have a moral, linguistic, age-related, or technical opposition to tweeting miss the clues to what happened next suggests that maybe we need a God after all, so bad we are at managing our own affairs, or at least those of the ones we love. By the time I arrived on the scene, though, it was all a moot point anyway. The first hint landed on the eldest birthday. As was custom, the boys always released a song that they had written themselves on the day commemorating their birth. If you find it surprising that this was their idea of a good time, then perhaps you do not understand that to arrive at global domination, a person's primary, if not only joy, must be work. Ask yourself, when was the last time you reached the pinnacle of anything? And I think I'll stop there.
That gives a great flavor. Thank
Thank
you. That
you.
was awesome. I really enjoyed that. You brought it back the beginning of it too. So this is your debut novel, and well done. Congratulations. So
Yeah.
tell us about your road to publication. People always like to know that. How did you get here?
Yeah, so it was a little bumpy. I was thinking the other day, I was like, I think I am on my fourth literary agent, even though
Wow, already?
yeah, because I think a million years ago, I wrote a novel that never went anywhere. But I got an agent to write nonfiction, like psychology. But we never ended up selling anything. And I just ended up writing a psychology textbook afterwards on my own when like publishers approached me directly at psych conferences. So that was my brief foray into publishing, but just in the nonfiction realm. And then I got another agent for a different novel that I wrote that is actually referenced in the band that's about the narrator's backstory and marriage.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that agent, and for people who are in the trenches of writing and querying and having agents, I don't know how rare this is, but that agent wanted me to hire an outside editor on my own dime to edit it before she sent it out. And she referred me to one editor, and I looked at their rates and I was like, yeah, I don't have this much disposable income to spend thousands of dollars on editing before you want to submit my novel. So we essentially parted ways semi-amicably over that. And it wasn't until my third agent that I got who, I just queried the old-fashioned way of sending out emails based on Google searches of literary agents and looking up what their preferences were and, publishers marketplace and what kind of stuff they were publishing. That I found the agent who ultimately sold the band. Uh, and she sold it, or they sold it in record time. So I think the submission went out midweek, and by 2 or 3 days later, I had heard back from the editor who ultimately acquired it, saying that they loved it and there was an offer coming. So I think that road, like it was a long, tortuous road
Yeah.
getting to the point of finding an agent to represent this specific book, the band. But once they got a hold of it and they sent it out, it was very fast, like unusually. So yeah, I think that just goes to show that for the average person, the average writer who's in the trenches of doing all the behind the scenes work, like you never know, right? It could be really tumultuous getting to that point of having an agent sending out your work. But then you could get your work bought up in 2, 3 days, right? And previous success or failure is not necessarily a great predictor of how anything you write will do. So go figure.
No, I mean, a lot of it is, I mean, your novel, I mean, it was well written as well, because that's sort of a prerequisite, but it was also timely. It is timely.
Yeah,
I haven't seen any other novels about K-pop. Maybe there are, but I haven't seen them.
yeah.
So, it has that too, that it was unique.
hmm Yeah, so I think a lot of it is just, like when I think about other writers, I was like, just don't give up, don't take anything personally, just keep plugging along. Eventually something will happen, and it might be a matter of timing a lot of the time too.
Absolutely. It's a long road. Yeah, you can't get depressed. I mean, the took me years to figure this out, but the reward is actually getting to write the novels. I mean, publication's cool. We all like to be published. But when I finally realized, well, really, success is I get to do this. I get to write novels and, make stuff up.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, I agree. It's a journey that matters more than, the ultimate destination. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And it is true. It's a cliche, but it actually is really true.
hmm
So one of my goals with the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other writers. So what's one thing you learned from writing your novel that you didn't know before?
That is a great question. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint it to one thing. I feel like there's things I learned about sort of the business side of publishing that I had
Hmm.
no idea before. But then there's also more stuff I learned about craft that I discovered as part of writing the novel. So I guess it depends on what people are more curious about. I would say on the craft side, the thing that I learned the most was probably the idea that you should constantly be thinking about how to reward your readers. And it was not something I thought about deeply before I became a writer. I didn't really like, and now that's changed the way I think about even the books that I read myself almost. Like when I notice that the writer is not rewarding me sufficiently, like I notice this now
Ah,
more than I did ever before. And what I mean by that is like if you're going to demand that a person puts aside time in their day or money out of their budget to spend money and or their hours on reading a book, you got to give them rewards, right? Like psychological rewards, right? So either some people give them a person to root for, and I admit I am not one of those people. I don't typically write just straight up heroes, right? That are ideal. But that's one easy way to reward people. Give them a really lovable character that they immediately fall in love with. Totally. I think Frederick Bachman, for example, does that really well. He writes only lovable characters. Um, so that's one way. Like I'm more of the anti-hero. I like to write people where you don't know how you feel about them because they're great, but they're also extremely problematic.
yeah.
So oftentimes when I write, I'm thinking like, okay, I want people to almost look more severely at things they think they know, but then they realize they have no idea. Right? It's
Mhm.
almost like I want to challenge them to reconsider the world in a way that's also entertaining, but I have to make sure
Yes.
I'm like rewarding them with entertainment while they're learning the lesson. Right. And that was one of the things the agent who sold the band mentioned to me when they started reading right off. She was like, it's funny, like I feel like your book teaches me something, but it's never pedantic. Right. It's never explicit. Like you never tell that I'm trying to teach you anything. It's more like, oh, this is a story, this is what happens. And once you read it, you realize, oh, these are things that now I'm paying attention to with mental health or with like, the dark side of the music industry that I don't think the average person may not have thought about deeply. So that's what I oftentimes think about reward from a craft standpoint. Are you rewarding the reader? Are you giving them something to take away above and beyond what's explicitly on the page? So that's probably the most craft thing I've learned.
Oh, I love that. I actually have not really heard it said that way, that we
hmm
are trying to reward our readers. I mean, one way you do it, A, with your language, because often you have these wonderful similes. Like, oh, I wish I'd written that. And and also you're funny. It's very funny. And also the learning. There was a few times when unfortunately I was driving. I thought, oh, I want to write that down. But I couldn't because I was driving. So
Yeah.
because I was learning stuff about what narcissism was and things like that. There were a few. sort of pithy comments that your narrator made. I went, oh, that's really good. But I was entertained. So but couching it in terms of reward, I like that. That's something to think about as you're writing because you get so bound up in the story and your characters. Sometimes I think we forget about the reason we're doing this is for
Yeah,
people to read it,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us what's next.
So I am working on another novel. I mean, I'm always working on another novel. But, uh, so the next one is it's a TikTok inspired. I mean, who knows what's gonna happen to TikTok these days.
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens to TikTok, it's sort of like a TikTok inspired novel about an influencer and a street musician. So as
Oh,
much
love it.
BTS inspired the band. I am sort of switching gears and going the opposite way. So, because BTS is a global phenomenon, right? They're like a cultural movement at this point, how big they are. So I wanted to go on the flip side because I still love music and I'm still obsessed with music and pop culture. But one of the things that I noticed, I love to travel on my free time. And one of the things I've noticed both when traveling in person and online, like on the apps, is just how many talented unknown people there are in the universe who can sing, for example. Whenever I'm strolling the streets of Brussels or London, I'll stop and hear a street musician, and I'm like, oh my God, they are as talented as Adele or Benson Boone or whomever. And no one knows who they are. They are totally nameless. They're selling their CDs on the side of the road. They're collecting
Yeah.
lunch money. And I'm always like, and on TikTok too, or Instagram, whatever your app of choice, you keep on scrolling. I don't know about everyone's algorithms, but I see a lot of insanely talented people that don't have record deals, aren't on the covers of any magazines, right? So I thought like as much as I love BTS and I was fascinated by their story, I'm also equally fascinated by the flip side of the unknowns of the world,
Yeah.
who are also super talented. So that's what the next one is about.
Oh, I love that. That sounds very interesting. So you're staying in the world of popular culture, which is great. We need more novels like that, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, I like the highbrow, lowbrow thing.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. So thank you so much, Christine, for chatting with me today. It's been delightful.
Yeah, well, thank you for reading and for talking with me. This is such an insightful conversation. So I really appreciate sort of all the things you've brought out and mentioned. And it's very rewarding talking to you too.
I've been speaking with Christine Ma-Kellams, the author of The Band, listed in the music category on Art and Fiction at www.artandfiction.com. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to Christine's website at www.christinema-kellams.com. If you are enjoying the Art and Fiction podcast, please help us keep the lights on by making a donation to the Ko-fi website at www.ko-fi.com/art in fiction. Also, please follow Art in Fiction on Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to give the Art in Fiction podcast a positive review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening.